Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We are at poem 252, I Can Wade Grief. This will be a fascinating study for us, and it will fit in with so many of the earlier poems that we've been working with. When this poem was published in 1891, it was actually titled The Test, Emily never actually titling any of her poetry. This is going to be a poem about the challenge of, we might call it silent suffering. You remember when we did poem 241, I like a look of agony, she will have said. When we get to poem 430, we'll hear about many a bitterness had been. This idea of living with pain and suffering was in some ways, I think, I was going to say the most important thing about the Christian Christ story. Certainly Christ's suffering and the crucifixion on the cross is for Emily going to be propedeutic. It's going to be instructional. It's going to be didactic. We'll obviously see it in this poem. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following your stuff. At LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist, and I'm hopeful that you've already worked through our set of introductory comments as well. I'm really hopeful that you've already worked through our preceding 251 poems. We just finished with 251 over the fence. Now, some have seen Emily as the penultimate skeptic. She is in some ways even weary of any kind of excess, even the excess of joy, and we'll obviously play this game. Notice the poem and how it will begin and end with a certain kind of boast, which is fascinating. And here, we're going to get one of the most famous lines in all of Emily's collection, power is only pain stranded through discipline. Any number of people have enjoyed that one. We are reminded, of course, of Nietzsche's classic, that which does not destroy me makes me stronger. It is, of course, a very old, many have argued that it's all of the sacred wisdom traditions who have to answer the question of theodicy, the question of pain and suffering. Not why did this happen to me, but why did this happen for me? Certainly Emily will play that game as well here. Let's enjoy the reading of the poem. I can wade grief, whole pools of it. I'm used to that. But the least push of joy breaks up my feet, and I tip, drunken. Let no pebble smile, 'twas the new liquor, that was all. Power is only pain stranded through discipline, till weights will hang. Give balm to giants, and they'll wilt like men. Give Himalaya, they'll carry him. Now, much has been made of the somewhat staggering rhythm of this poem, which seems to obviously kind of play into the idea, I can put up with any amount of pain and suffering, but man, when I have joy, it collapses me. Let's see how she plays the game. First of all, notice she'll begin with this word, wade. I can wade griefs. When we get to poem 1211, here much later in our study together, it'll read like this. And this is a fascinating way for her to say it. A sparrow took a splice of twig and thought it very nice. I think because his empty plate was handed nature twice, invigorated, waded in all the deepest sky until his little figure was fortified away. Her use of this word, wade, is going to be a powerful image. When we get to poem 1609, it will be motes of mystery. And the idea, of course, of pools, we think about all the religious kind of resonances there. I can wade grief, and you'll remember grief from poem 89 when we played that game just recently as we worked through that poem. You'll remember it this way. Poem 89, some things that fly there be, birds, ours, the bumblebee, of these no elegy. Some things that stay there be. Her first word in listing it is grief, hills, eternity. This idea of grief is going to be central. In 15 poems, she'll use this word, grief. I can wade grief, whole pools of it. Many have made references to the Noah and the ark and the flood motif here in regards to pools. I'm used to that. By the way, notice all the P sounds from the word pools on here. I'm used to that. But, in other words, I have lived a life accustomed to pain and suffering. I know that. But the least push of joy, taking us back to poem 172, 'tis so much joy, 'tis so much joy. The least push of joy. What an amazing phrase. Push of joy. It's almost like being pushed on. Breaks up my feet. Here we'll get breaks, later we'll get hang. Breaks up my feet, and I tip drunken. And this will, of course, take us to the idea of Acts 2:13, filled with new wine, and the idea of Poem 2:14, I taste the liquor never brewed, that we've already commented on. And I tip drunken. Let no pebble smile. Here, some people have recognized pebble as being just the normal people. 'Twas the new liquor. And again, we're playing that game of Poem 2:14. That was all. And by the way, the phrase, that was all, is only used one other time in her poetry, in Poem 5:19. In other words, she begins by saying, look, I can get through grief, pain, suffering, sorrow, but man, when I get joy, it just messes up my world, because I'm so unaccustomed to it that when it happens, it's almost like I'm drunk. And she calls it the new liquor. Many have read into this, obviously, the idea of a New Testament and the Christian overlays. And then she'll say, power is only pain. The endurance of pain equals power. She uses the word stranded, and much has been made of the Webster Dictionary that she would have consulted about stranded as in a boat, stranded up on a beach. In other words, stuck, if you will. But here, stranded is a process almost, right? Power is only pain, stranded through discipline. I think that our word stranded here is almost like learned through discipline. And the discipline here is that not kind of a discipline that's set upon by some outside force, but rather some kind of, we might say, internal self-regulation, we might say. This is the Platonic view of discipline in our study of Republic, and we can run all that to ground at learnstrong.net. But the idea that there's a certain kind of self-discipline. So she says, power is only pain, stranded through discipline. And then she'll say, till weights will hang. In other words, it gets to the point where we don't even think about the amount of pain that we can tolerate, because we're able to tolerate it so well. Again, when this was published in 1891, it's called The Test, right? And they'll, give balm or comfort, if you will, to giants. And here, of course, you can't read this if you're Emily's audience and not think about the fact that on the cross, balm is given. Of course, balm of Gilead is a famous referencing as well. Give balm to giants. And here we immediately think of Atlas, don't we? And they'll wilt. When we get to Poem 1102, study her use of the word wilt. It's quite remarkable, feathers wilted. And they'll wilt like men. In other words, if you want to take a giant and turn him into a normal person, then give him comfort, give him ease, give him, Plato called it in Republic, luxury, and it'll turn them in quickly into pigs, as he said, right? And they'll wilt like men. Give them Himalaya. She's using a kind of special spelling of this. Himalaya, and when we get to Poem 481, we will see this use of that word one more time. The Himalaya was known to stoop under the daisy low. Give Himalaya, and giants will carry that, and carry him. Notice Himalaya and him, right? Well, I think that there's a couple of poems here I want to set us up for in our study. One is Poem 1176. When we get to that poem, we're going to enjoy that one, and it runs like this. It runs, we never know how high we are till we are asked to rise. And then, if we are true to plan, our statures touch the skies. The heroism we recite would be a normal thing, did not ourselves the cubits warp, for fear to be a king. And when we get to Poem 1055, we're going to enjoy it. We're going to enjoy this poem much better because of our study here. The soul should always stand ajar, that if the heaven inquire, he will not be obliged to wait, or shy of troubling her. Depart before the host have slid the bolt unto the door, to search for the accomplished guest, her visitor no more. What's her argument? Well, if you comfort, give balm to giants, you can make them weak. On the other hand, if you give them a mountain to carry, that will only make them stronger, tougher. The message here, of course, sounding again much like Nietzsche. And of course, this was our study of Dante and the Divine Commedia, right? We don't go to hell, we go through it. Dante makes the argument. You'll remember that Virgil will have to answer Dante's I'm done, I'm finished in Canto 24 of Inferno. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. You'll remember that Virgil says, up on your feet. This is no time to tire. Let's go, right? You can certainly read the poem that way. At 2b, I'm interested in the staggering meter of this poem. Read it and you'll kind of hear it. It has that very sense of kind of, trying to figure out how to struggle under the weight, right? Of course, you can think about Christ and the carrying of the cross to Calvary. Certainly, it's possible that Emily had that in the back of her mind. All of the P sounds, for sure. There's a number, I'm making a lot of references to poems in this lecture because I think there's so much of Emily's poetry later that will help us. When we get to poem 561, I measure every grief I meet with narrow probing eyes. I wonder if it weighs like mine or has an easier size. I wonder if they bore it long or did he just begin? I could not tell the date of mine. It feels so old a pain. I wonder if it hurts to live and if they have to try and whether could they choose between it would not be to die. I note that some, gone patient long, at length renew their smile in imitation of a light that has so little oil. I wonder if when years have piled some thousands on the harm that hurt them early, such a lapse would give them any balm. You can obviously see the reasons why we'll compare these two poems. Or would they go on aching still through centuries of nerve, enlightened to a larger pain in contrast with the love that grieved our many, I am told. There is the various cause. Death is but one and comes but once and only nails the eyes. There's grief of want and grief of cold, sort they call despair. There's banishment from native eyes in sight of native air. And though I may not guess the kind correctly, yet to me a piercing comfort it affords in passing Calvary, to note the fashions of the cross and how they're mostly worn, still fascinated to presume that some are like my own. It's a fascinating study. Or when we get to poem 663, we'll play a similar kind of game. Again, his voice is at the door. I feel the old degree. I hear him ask the servant for such an one as me. I take a flower as I go, my face to justify. He never saw me in this life. I might surprise his eye. I cross the hall with mingled steps. I silent pass the door. I look on all this world contains, just his face, nothing more. We talk in careless and in toss, a kind of plummet stray, each sounding shyly just how deep the other's one have been. We walk. I leave my dog at home. A tender, thoughtful moon goes with us just a little way, and then we are alone. Alone if angels are alone. First time they try the sky. Alone if those veiled faces be we cannot count on high. I'd give to live that hour again, the purple in my vein. But he must count the drops himself, my price for every stain. And finally, when we get to poem 1176, we'll play a similar kind of game that will read like this. It will say, we never know how high we are till we are asked to rise. I've shared this already once with you. And then, if we're true to plan, again, this takes us back to that discipline, our statures touch the skies. Think about the power of Dante's Divine Commedia. Think about Tennyson's In Memoriam. The idea that Tennyson, after all of that loss, he says it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. And then, of course, the myth of Atlas comes to mind at 3a as well. Finally, to own a poem like this, and I think this poem demands that we think a little bit about, especially that line, power is only pain stranded through discipline. Was a time when you had to endure great pain. You came out on the other side, and you were better for it. Some of you will say the very reading of these poems is a pain, a suffering you're willing to take on for the joy on the other side. Thank you.